Amina Inloes was born in Irvine, California, United States. She received an MA degree in Islamic Studies from the Islamic College in 2009 and an MA degree in teaching with an emphasis on mathematics. She is the program leader for the MA Islamic Studies program in Islamic College in London. She has a PhD in Islamic Studies from the University of Exeter. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
That's one of the most accurate introduction biographies I've gotten. I'm quite impressed. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. First, I wanted to say aloud what I was saying to my neighbor over there, which was I was rather touched by the way that was phrased on the flyer, celebrating the life of Lady Khadija. I think that's a very nice way to look at how we commemorate them. Obviously, the only reason we we pay attention, regrettably, as human beings, to when people pass on was because there was something about their lives that was touching and moving and important to us that we'd like to carry on in our memories. So inshallah, I'm going to remember that. We are actually, I'm looking for my PowerPoint. Where is it? Is it over there? Is there? Oh, I can't see it. This is terrible. Okay, sorry. So you guys are going to have to tell me what it says, unless I can actually get up and go over there. That would be good for me. It might not be good for them. Okay, now I can see it. Thank you very much. Technology. So we're going to be looking at a question that's been coming up increasingly, I'd say the past decade or so, and that is the month of Ramadan going the same way as Christmas, basically, to sum it up. I think most of us have heard a lot of complaints among people, especially in the West, about how Christmas has, for many people, transformed from a religious holiday into more of a big consumerist celebration, with a lot of social pressure to buy presents and buy cards and buy this and buy that and destroy the environment while we're doing all of that. So sometimes some people ask the same thing about the month of Ramadan. Is it becoming, first of all, too materialistic? There's actually 2 or 3 words I could have put there. I just didn't do it because I thought it doesn't look nice to have too many words. Materialistic, consumerist, or commercialized. Those are 3 related but separate things, and they are all interrelated. Commercialized, I think, is obvious. Commercials, advertising, etc. We see it in London, right? Whether it's good or bad, we do see it. Thank you. Materialistic, I'm sure we can think a bit about that and get on to that. And consumerist, well, that goes a bit with the advertising. I'm going to warn you from the outset, I'm not planning to give you a straightforward answer to this and beat it into your heads, in part because I don't believe there is a single answer to this. I think it's a question that has facets, and I think everyone's experience is different. Our experience here is going to be different in Tehran or Najaf or Beijing or wherever we happen to be. And all of our lives are different. So I don't think I can generalize about everyone and everything, but what I'd like to do is to point out some important features that I think are good to integrate into our thought processes as part of how we critically consider what is going on in the world around us and how we are being influenced also by the environment that we live in. And you can see the ayah on the bottom of the PowerPoint. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ya Bani Adam, that's us. خُذُوا زِينَتَكُمْ عِنْدَ كُلِّ مَسْجِدٍ. So wear your nice clothes or adornment at every masjid. Some people do interpret it as other than clothing, but that's a literal interpretation. وَكُلُوا وَاشْرَبُوا. Eat and drink, inshallah, in less than an hour, inshallah. وَلَا تُسْرِفُوا. And do not waste. Do not waste, go be extravagant. Allah, inna Allah la yuhibbul musrifin. Allah does not love those who waste. Just a side note on that last part of the ayah before we go on. I think as human beings, thank God, we are at the position where we do acknowledge that excessive waste creates a lot of social injustice, destroys the planet, etc. However, in modern secular culture, we don't usually elevate that to a higher level, which is a divine level or a spiritual level. In this ayah, it's not specifically saying, do not waste because it's going to bring misery on your civilization, although you might find that if you look at some of the hadith about Akhir Zaman, but it says, do not do this because it will remove Allah's love from you. And that is something which, it does have serious ramifications, both spiritually and civilizationally. It's something to ponder. Right. But one of the things we're also pondering tonight is Hazrat Khadija, peace be upon her. And so I wanted to just think about a few facets of her life and experience that may relate to us today and may also relate to this question. So I gave it some thought. What are the basic things that we tend to bring to mind when we think about her? Okay, I'll ask those of you who are present in this room, what are some basic things that come to mind? Okay, so piety and success in business and commerce. That's very notable. And in fact, we know that the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, obviously he started his, yes, you can say salawat, it's okay. He started, or one can say his business career took off to working for her. So even in the roots of Islam, we don't have any inherent contradiction between a healthy worldly life and a healthy spiritual life. If I can surmise a bit, or I can speculate a bit, and please forgive me if anyone out there, if they upload this on YouTube, doesn't agree, this is something that differentiates Islam with some of the world traditions, and I'm given to understand in particular Christianity, where I think there's a much more uneasy relationship between being involved in worldly success, such as business or a very active family life, and reaching the highest spiritual ideals. I'm not saying you can't do it, but I'm given to understand by certain people of that faith that there's a bit more discomfort in finding the right way to do it. In our tradition, we do have ways to work harmoniously with worldly life and spirituality, and we expect it. So this is one thing that obviously, when it comes to talking about materialism, having things is not bad. Allah has just instructed us to make use of the blessings that He has granted us. Okay, other things about her? Okay, so she was a major contributor to Islam. And at a time when Islam was very desperate. So we see that saying there, that Islam would not have survived were it not for the sword of Ali and the wealth of Khadija. Or yes. And so we do see that she is seen by most of us as someone who was really instrumental in Islam, not only in terms of the moral support and the emotional support of the Holy Prophet, may Allah's peace and blessings be upon him and his family, but also literally keeping the community alive at a time when they were under a lot of opposition. So basically, if we can distill some of these things, we have her as being someone who is very involved with money, basically, someone who showed how to use that for something good, but also someone who's living at a time when Muslims were a severe minority, because that was why her wealth was so important. Not only were they a minority, but there was a lot of poverty among them, and when they were exiled to the when they were exiled, the Bani Hashim, then they really had to rely on that. So basically, I want to get some keywords here: wealth, minority, and poverty, which I think are very relevant to a lot of us today. Now, being a minority here is obvious. I think a lot of us are feeling it today in particular. I'm going to elevate that a bit more and say I think a lot of us, meaning the Ummah, Muslims throughout the world, do tend to see ourselves as marginalized in the face of global, westernized culture, etc. I think a lot of us have that sense of being second best or looking up at something, even if we aren't necessarily a numerical minority. But definitely in many places we are an actual minority, and I think that changes a lot of our attitude to these things as well. And last but not least, when you look at what was going on and the opposition to Islam at the time, why were people so against the Holy Prophet? Why were they torturing the early Muslims? As it generally is, it doesn't appear that it was a theological issue. If there were already people who were monotheists then, they were worshipping Allah. If the Prophet just wants to go and worship Allah in a cave or in the desert, no one was going to bother him. But the main issue there, and you see the same thing with Christianity and probably many other faiths, is that the message was threatening to the power structures. So there were certain unhealthy power structures in society that relied on social injustice or favoritism or and so forth, basically to keep wealth in the hands of certain people and to keep themselves in power. Now, is this happening today? Well, of course it's happening today. This is, unfortunately, it is human nature. But also that's really, I think, where the root of some of these issues come in with respect to the month of Ramadan being, is it too materialistic or commercialized? It's not just of an issue of, well, I ate too much for iftar and I couldn't really concentrate in my prayer and now I feel like rubbish. I mean, okay, that's not good, but that's a personal problem. These issues don't really seem to be personal problems anymore. They seem to be global problems. And so I think we have to think about it in the larger scheme of things. So these are some ways you can look at what was going on then and now. I wanted to take a couple moments just to reflect on some of what we do have in Quran and Hadith about the good and bad side of wealth, just as a reminder that there is a balanced view in our tradition. Well, we saw the first ayah on the front page. Inshallah, you can read it over there. And again, this is a reminder that Allah has blessed us with many things. I want to emphasize, because inshallah we'll come back to this later, Allah has blessed us with good things, with healthy things, with things that are good for us. Like if I drink a nice cup of watermelon juice, fresh from the watermelon for iftar. Not that I'm thinking about that. That's something that I enjoy and most likely is beneficial for me, unless I have like some kind of health problem or something. Whereas if I go to McDonald's and eat a burger, which is God knows what's in the burger, that's something that's not necessarily going to bring about the same wholesomeness for myself. Yes, and that saying from Imam Ali, alayhi salam, let me just focus on it. And because I think this really encapsulates our ideals about wealth in the material world, that basically being an ascetic or a zahid person, this is in the days when people were starting to, one could say, put on a certain air of religiosity, like I fast every day of my life, I don't sleep, I say my Isha and Fajr prayers on the same wudu, and I eat my one date, and that's that. And they're saying that this, and of course I'm sure this can bring about some spirituality, but he says that the true ascetic or zahid person is not the person who just gives up everything and stays in the corner in the mosque, but it's the person that if they have everything, this is actually a different saying than the one I was thinking about, but if they have everything and it basically they intend the pleasure of Allah, or if they lose everything. Okay, this is actually completely different. That's what's in my mind. Sorry. But anyway, you can read what's on the screen. The one I'm thinking of is if they gain everything and it doesn't affect them, and they lose everything and it doesn't affect them. So the idea is our faith and our relationship with Allah is not dependent on material things, or to put it another way, we aren't owned by the world, but rather we own and control the things that Allah has granted us. Let's have some salawat power. Okay, so on the other side of the screen, we saw some ayat. There we are, reminding us that this world is transient, it is deceptive. Obviously, we are allowed to use it, but it is glittery and alluring. And for people who go very deep just into acquiring to acquire, it's a never-ending process that also never brings any peace to their hearts. And so the Holy Quran does caution us about this. And it's good to remember that as well, especially in this discussion. And what I want to emphasize here is not the fact that the world and worldly things can be deceptive, but we live in a culture and in a time and a place where there's a lot of push in the broader culture to seek personal value, fulfillment, and worth through material things. There are many ways that we seek our worth in society or we value ourselves, but there is definitely a push to find self-fulfillment through buying things, buying better things. I know I'm guilty and all, but the point, and whether it's especially for women, a lot of clothing, hair, appearance, etc., your car, your house. And I think that we can't help being affected by this as a community and as individuals. This is the ocean we swim in. The fish can't get out of the water it swims in. I think a lot of us would feel embarrassed in our self-worth. For example, if we want to have a guest to our house, but our house is maybe we don't have enough space for furniture, for example. We feel maybe we're a little bit lesser. Or if we can't make enough types of foods. And I'm not saying everyone, but especially because I can't speak about every individual, but these things are pretty common in our community, that there's a lot of worth for ourselves based on what we have and what we can present or what we can offer. Whereas and also, of course, we do tend to live in a time where we look at the primary measure of success as things such as degree, career, etc., which is all good. But obviously, it's not the only way people have evaluated themselves before history. I mean, you go back 200 years, no one was getting uni degrees anyway. And it's good in its place, but I do think it's not good when people look to this sort of thing for the primary sense of human fulfillment. I mean, this is a little bit off topic, but I know someone who recently went through cancer treatment in the US. And it was rather extensive. They had radiation therapy and chemotherapy, and at the end they got a diploma, so to speak, saying, we've certified that you have completed this therapy with commitment and courage and so on and so forth. And I was looking at that, I was thinking, no matter how many graduate degrees you have, I got 3 of them, like they said at the beginning, that's going to be your most important diploma in life, I finished my cancer treatment diploma, because there are certain things that just cut through all of the ways we work with the material world. Anyway, so those are some thoughts about that. Now I find this excerpt rather amusing. I'm going to give you some time to read it. Okay, so back a few hundred years ago, he's telling people off for pretty much the same thing we tell people off for today. You eat all the foods that you never eat any time of year. You eat so much that you can't pray. How are you going to guard yourselves against shaitan and the shayateen the rest of the year when you can't control your stomach, etc.? So it is interesting to see that this is not a modern thing. However, one thing again to consider is this is still a personal / family / spiritual issue. It doesn't seem to me offhand like it's a major social issue, although it could have been in that context for all I know. But that does bring up to mind some of the stereotypes that we do see floating around about the month of Ramadan. Sorry, we actually lost something there. It's not supposed to happen. Sorry, I'm just going to take a look here. There we go. But we are living in a time where we do start to see this sort of thing. So now I actually want to get into the question of materialism and consumerism. That guy over there, you might not get what's going on. Has anyone seen this ad? It's a Nando's ad. Let me see if I can get it to play on the next slide. I don't know how to. Can someone over there play the video? You like click it with the mouse and then you play it. There's like a button underneath. You go down underneath the. Yeah, right there. Okay, so we all get that. We're all feeling that right now. It's very creative. I mean, I get it. It speaks to me in a way I understand. But that does bring up a lot of stereotyping that does come up in some of how the month of Ramadan tends to be discussed these days. And it's one of the things... There we go. It's one of the things that we do tend to hear a lot in the media nowadays. And not just in the media, I hear it from people too. I feel like there are some rumors nowadays that we Muslims, we fast and then we feast. I don't know if you saw the Sainsbury's ad at the beginning. It was about a family. It says first that we fast, then we feast. So the idea is a lot of people are talking about how gluttonous we are in the month of Ramadan, just chowing down on all this food, and then sleeping during the day and... sleeping during the day and staying up all night and partying and being lazy, and basically not really living in the spirit of the month of Ramadan. Yes, stereotypes. So you hear a lot of people talking about gaining weight in the month of Ramadan. I'm sure most of you have heard that before. We do joke about it in our community sometimes. Is that your life, personally? How should I know? I don't know. Yeah, I'm sure it's true for some people, that some people take advantage of the time to just eat everything and stay up doing this and that and just being lazy people. But I don't think in general that's most... I don't think the stereotypes reflect the broader reality. I think that it can happen, but I think it's... it can be a bit of a joke because sometimes this is more of what's happening. Not that. Yes, that one. But these are also aspects of what is happening too, which do give a different picture. And I think it's worth considering that a lot of what I hear, at least, that's getting circulated these days is a bit more in terms of this. And while one can be self-reflective about this, and one can think, for example, about how much one is sleeping during the day or whatever, it's good to consider where these messages are coming from and why the month of Ramadan is sometimes getting this bad press these days. Okay, well, so that's one thing. We can imagine, using your great imaginal faculties, you can imagine those advertisements back up there. And you'll notice there was one for Burger King, there was one for Nando's. We're going to leave out Nando's for now. So let's look at Burger King, McDonald's, and the Oreo one, which some of you saw before if you came to the pre-Ramadan workshop a couple weeks ago. One of the things that comes to mind when I look at that is the ayah at the beginning of the presentation. Actually, sorry, not at the beginning of the presentation. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Kulu min tayyibati ma razaqnakum washkurullah inallah in kuntum iyyahu ta'budun. Eat of the good things that Allah has provided for you, or eat of the good things that we have provided as sustenance for you, and thank Allah if it is Allah that you worship. Now, I look at those things and I don't necessarily see good things that Allah has provided for us. Yes, I know the younger people are thinking they're very, very good. I don't mean it's haram to eat them. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with them in moderation. But I don't necessarily see as many divine blessings on a lot of levels. And I think that's one of the reasons there can be a bit of disconnect. Like if it said Ramadan Kareem next to an apple, I'd be like, okay, apple, great. Allah made the apple, even if you're not paying the person in the orchard enough to pick it. But there are a lot of deeper issues there. And one is these are things that basically harm you without helping you, given that most fast food is even if the meat in it is halal, it can be called a meat product, perhaps. There isn't a lot of food in a lot of the fast food. So these are things that if you eat them for iftar, at the very least, you're not going to be feeling very well the next day. That's one of the lessons you learn from the month of Ramadan, right? You think about what you're eating at night, because if I get my halal fast food, I'm probably going to be feeling really miserable the next day. So it's not quite the same thing as a very healthy-looking sandwich or something. So, and I think this is one of the problems with capitalism, basically, which most people say one of the problems is pushing people to buy things they don't need. So basically, you're siphoning money away from people to buy things that not only they don't need, but are actually harmful to them. And that does seem to be in contradiction to Quranic values and what Allah is saying. So it's not just a question of enjoying food or enjoying blessings or enjoying wealth. And then you start bringing in the whole structure around this. These aren't foods that are being grown and picked with a minimum of processing. You've got the factories, the packaging, the transportation, the chemical additives. So you've got all this environmental load, which means that basically we are not necessarily respecting the planet and the creation. You tend to have nowadays, as you know, a wage gap and with the currency gap and so forth. The way a lot of goods are produced is not equitable. And also you do have the uncomfortable factor, and I don't want to get all like revolutionary in here, but the multinational corporations, which I think a lot of us are quite sensitive to the fact that there are corporations globally that are sucking the money out of a lot of countries, or even in a country which is fairly wealthy like America, sucking the money out of a lot of people, such as in this. Yeah, you might have seen this graphic, this sort of thing. So what I'm saying is there's a difference between enjoying food that Allah has provided, or enjoying a biscuit that someone has baked, or the bakery has baked, or even a well-run factory has made, versus something which is feeding into multinational corporations, which may be politically allied with political entities which do not have the best interest of the Muslim world or other countries in mind. Now, this is a lot to read into, like Oreos and stuff, but what I'm saying is there are sub-messages here, which is why perhaps when someone like me looks at it, I stop and think for a while. I think it's a bit funny when I put all of these things together, in the same way that I don't necessarily think it's as funny if I just see Ramadan Mubarak at the library or something. So these are some things to think about with respect to some of the advertising. Now, one of the questions that comes to mind also is, are these pictures uncomfortable to some people because they are a clash with our values? Now, that's not a question that I can necessarily give a straightforward answer to. Like I was saying at the beginning, these are more thinking questions. I think it's a very individual question, which pictures represent our values and why. I know that some Muslims respond very negatively to, I guess you can say, putting Islamic symbols next to symbols which they don't believe represent Islam. I don't know if any of you saw the model with her hair covered on Vogue the other day, and some of the arguments that came out of that. I am of the view that I think the main issue there is not that she's on a magazine cover, but it's the clash of symbols. The hijab is an Islamic symbol with one set of values, one set of concerns, and I would say an overall worldwide feeling of being threatened and marginalized. And then you have Vogue, which is like a whole other set of agendas and power structures and so forth. So sometimes there can be a clash. Is there a clash? Which of these are authentic or not? The first one is Asda. I know that Asda is the local Muslim hangout. The second one, Debenhams, which was kind of weird to me. I had the misfortune of having to go into Debenhams the other day, and I did see one of these. But okay, we do wear clothes. The Body Shop. I mean, most of us in this room, I don't know about you guys over there, but most of us are not going to object if someone brings home a Body Shop gift. I mean, it's nice, but again, is it in the spirit of the month of Ramadan or not? They have like a in some countries, I don't know if they have it here, they have a 30-day month of Ramadan calendar where you get one mini product for each day. It's like for Christmas, at least in the olden days, they had those advent calendars where you put stickers and stuff on or do things for the kids leading up to Christmas. So they had the month of Ramadan advent calendar. Which again, it's a bit weird. And it takes a while to break down why it's a bit weird, because again, there's nothing wrong with, like, you know, in theory, the product itself, but to combine them feels a bit odd. And the last one is Mark and Spencer, which I'm given to understand there are some funding issues there. So even setting aside whatever they're advertising, it does appear there's some deeper issues putting Ramadan Mubarak or Ramadan Kareem on that. So, which of these are things that we might feel are threatening or even offensive to our values? Which are ones that we would feel very comfortable with and we feel that they reflect our values? Again, I'm going to let you think about that. I have my own views on it. I don't think it's an entirely a religious issue, so to speak. I think as Muslims today, we do sometimes fall in the trap of trying to isolate religion and pretend that somehow it's only something theoretical and we can separate religion and culture. We can't. We gain our religion and our practice through how other people do it and in a community. As an example, I don't come from a culture where samosas are a traditional food, but I feel very comfortable with samosas as something that feels authentically Islamic. I don't know why. There's no surah al-samosa in the Quran. There's no hadith. There's no fatwa about it. But the association is there that it feels very comfortable, even if I know Asda is just trying to make money off of me. The others I personally have a sort of descending level of comfort with. But that's to you, up to you. But there is, of course, the flip side, which some people will mention, and that is, well, it actually feels quite nice to see these because it makes us feel like we belong, right? Especially when we're living as a minority. I'm not sure how many of you have lived in places, or maybe it was like this here even a couple decades ago, where Muslims have been a very invisible minority. Like definitely when I was, say, 15, the issue was not Islamophobia and hatred of Islam. It was ignorance of Islam. It didn't mean anything to anyone. At most, most people I ran into might have some very bizarre, exoticized ideas like, oh, you pray to Mecca, don't you? Or things like that, the very Orientalist ideas. But it's, to me at least, it's more difficult to be in an environment where people don't understand you than it is to be in an environment where people hate you. Because at least if they hate you, there's some connection and acknowledgement going on. But having been through that, I can totally understand why it feels good to go to the grocery store and see a Ramadan display. Because that does make you feel a bit more like you belong. And I'm sure if you have kids, it feels good to be able to take them places and see where their identity is being reinforced. So I'm not going to say that that's bad. I do have a thought about that I do think is worth sort of hanging out there and appending to think about. And that is, I do think it is worth asking why it feels comfortable for us to be normal through commercialization. That is, it goes back to the ocean and the fish, and we're all swimming in a place, in an ocean, where capitalism and consumerism are very normalized. If seeing the Body Shop, for example, with the Ramadan calendar makes us feel normalized, then what does that say about what's inside of us? What does that say about what's inside of me if I need that reassurance to feel normal to tell the rest of the world, yes, I'm really into your capitalist consumerist society too. We can do this in Ramadan. I think that's another angle to look at it, but these are all very complicated issues. So let's look at some other thoughts, inshallah. Yes. So another thing which is very new nowadays, compared to, again, say 20 years ago, is the pressures of social media. Now, what pressures or what effects do these have? That, again, is a good thinking question, but since I'm monopolizing things up here, I would say there's a couple things that come to mind. One is that I feel like, by and large, although I'm not feeling it now, but I feel like, by and large, having so much social media has broken down a lot of our human bonds. You hear people saying nowadays today that kids don't know how to have proper conversations with human beings in the sense when you sit in front of someone and speak in a back and forth sort of manner, because they spend so much time interacting online or on their phones and so forth. Now, I can't say if that's true or not, but I do think that in my own life, and I don't want to sound like I'm glorifying the past and all nostalgic, but at least I'd say 30 years ago, when you wanted to talk to someone, you went to their house, or you called them. Those were your options, or you met somewhere. You made an arrangement and you met. But there was always pretty much that human-to-human contact, or at least vocal contact. And even then, I remember people saying that took away from the human interaction. Nowadays, I'm going to be honest, most of my interactions with my friends tend to be on Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp. And I'm not saying that's bad. That enables me to keep in touch with people who are not here. As you know, you have a different type of interaction with people online or through the phone and so forth. And I think that can help to appreciate different aspects of our personalities. A lot of us are much more comfortable discussing deeper and more sensitive subjects via text message than face-to-face. But there's still something that is lost there. Because at the end of the day, we are human beings, and there is something to be said about the human-spiritual interaction. And I think, incidentally, to some degree, we might see that sometimes in our communities as well. There's a really good side with respect to all the online stuff that's available for Islam. But there's another side. I was thinking about that as you were reciting Du'a al-Iftitah, and I didn't actually know you started the Du'a before the talk. But I was thinking about how nice it is to actually be somewhere where the Du'a is being recited in person, because to me it does feel like that these aren't, for the large part, du'as that are meant to be recited alone, or as I often do, listening online. I'm sure a lot of us do that. I mean, it's good to have that. I appreciate having that. I thought it was the best thing in the world when it came out. But I think sometimes there can be a tendency to rely on that, especially, during places like here where the day is very long, and then sometimes you're tired to go out at night, so you stay home and listen to it. It takes away from the human aspect of spirituality, which I think is also very important. And I think to some degree that really feeds into what's going on just with respect to the whole materialism and self-worth versus material things and so forth. There's basically a general trend around the world, or at least in some places, maybe not everywhere. Along with the materialism trend is the sort of breaking down of human bonds trend. You look at a lot of what's happening here. A lot of people say they feel isolated in society. And these are things to keep in mind too when we use these sorts of things. And I do think, incidentally, the month of Ramadan can function very well to help put those bonds back together, right? You're here. I was actually surprised how many people are here. I shouldn't have been surprised, but just because sometimes I come here and there's only a few people. And so I think that when we have spaces that are welcoming and inclusive and can look after people with all sorts of different situations, it can help to counter the sort of the harshness, I would say, of the modern world. In any case, social media, so there's that one aspect that sometimes, even while it brings people, gives them the sense of coming together, it sometimes makes people feel more isolated or lonely. And then, of course, there is the pressure to show nice pictures and put up a good image and make it look like, where are we at? I had such a good tweet there. They're all mixed up. Okay, maybe we're not meant to have the tweet. Oh well. It was a tweet from someone who said that fasting all day and then making a really lavish iftar. It is there? Oh, there's the tweet. Okay. See, this is what fasting does to me. It defeats the whole purpose of the month of Ramadan. Again, I'm not Allah, I'm not going to pass judgment. That's not my job to judge people's faith. But I do think we feel this pressure to show, to show a good face and to put up the image of a happy life and to put up the image of beautiful food. And I know I like food pictures too. But again, the problem is not necessarily that you are doing that, but to think about how it affects you, how it affects other people, why are you doing it, what does it mean? This is a little bit off topic, but definitely that comes up with respect to Hajj and Ziyarah, right? You see people living the moment through their camera. And I completely understand why someone wants to send a picture to their relatives halfway around the world or wherever. It's, once in a lifetime experience. But there is something to be said for living the moment and not trying to materially capture the moment. Because the moment you start up photoing or videoing, you're not as much in the moment anymore, right? And if you're doing tawaf and you start to do that, that's actually a really big thing. You're taking yourself from the presence of Allah in a space which is 100% dedicated to being in the presence of Allah. That's why you're there, that's why you're doing it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be walking around the Holy Kaaba. And you're taking yourself out of that space and putting yourself back in the material world by trying to take pictures of it. I'm not being down on art and photography. It has its place. But what I'm saying is there is a place for living the moment and fasting from the phone, like during Hajj. I think it's good to, put it aside for the trip. You can tell people about the trip or take 1 or 2 photos, rather than getting caught up in these things, which again, just bring back, basically, they bring back that sense of materialism and consumerism. Okay, so in conclusion, there are many other things we could talk about. I talked about this, or we talked about it, at a workshop before the month of Ramadan a couple weeks ago. And the participants had a number of views on whether or not the month of Ramadan is being too commercialized or it's too materialistic. So you can see a lot of thoughts. I thought I would do the hive mind thing. These are their thoughts on the matter. So you can see there's a lot of thoughtful points on both sides. I don't look at that and say there is one side to the issue. But I do look at that and see that there are deeper issues and there are important things that we can contemplate. So inshallah, some of this can help you contemplate the issue. And inshallah, since we're talking about enjoying the blessings of Allah, we can have, and virtual social media, we can all enjoy some virtual cupcakes. Thank you. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.